Welcome to our next session by Chris Clarke from Cerberus Technology. And Chris is going to be talking to us about integration of IP networks and satellite technology and how those two complement and supplant each other, I guess. Very good. Take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Wes. So, like Wes says, my name's Chris Clarke from Cerberus Tech in the UK. I'll start with a brief introduction as to who I am. Everyone's got a past, right? And this is mine. So I spent 9 years in the British military, in the Royal Signals, as a military communicator, predominantly moving high-value data from one point on Earth to another point on Earth for secure purposes. We still do the same today in the company. It's just that the high-value data is video signals for broadcast transmission. I then spent 5 years as a defense contractor, as a civilian, doing a lot of the same things, to be honest, but we spent some time developing Skynet 5 for the British military and the communications management system that went with it. And then I did a year as a contractor in a media and entertainment business in the UK before spying an opportunity for taking the skill sets that we had in the small team for moving high-value data across IP networks and moving it into broadcast media space. Back a bit. So this is me now. Who am I today? So Chris Clarke, CEO of Cerberus Tech, with my LinkedIn profile there. We did originally start out as Cerberus Satellite Services. We spent some time doing Ka-band IP uplinks for remote purposes. We did a lot of work for film and TV productions, trying to do high-value data from remote locations back. And then during conversations with some of those customers, we established the managed service provision. The questions were like, can we move a live video signal from where the filming's happening to a trailer? And because of the background that we had, we knew it's not outside the realms of possibility to move it from where the filming was happening securely to any other point on Earth. And that was really the catalyst for the company. So what does the company do today? We deliver live video circuits for two purposes. One is 24/7 linear service distribution. So typically picking up a TV channel from playout and delivering it to broadcast centers around the world, but using IP as a transmission mechanism. So typically public internet, although tier 1 ISP links across cloud platforms, and delivering those signals as ZXI or as RIS or as SRT signals directly into the head ends. And we have another platform that is dealing with occasional use. So that is picking up live sports and delivering them equally into head ends or playout facilities for transmission. And we have an IP-based toolkit that we have developed in-house that actually runs as a protocol application switcher, fully Dockerized. You can run it in a data center or on a device, but it'll handle any IP protocol in and any IP protocol out, so allowing you to do protocol switching between the two. Crucially, as part of our company and our distribution and pertinent to the presentation today, we've established what we refer to as a Livelink service network, Livelink being our occasional use tool. And we've established a relationship with around about a dozen teleports around the world that allows us to interface IP transmission networks with traditional satellite and fiber POPs. A lot of our customers have, all we've done for 8 years is essentially IP distribution. And so our customer base is very well versed in it, but they want these services picked up from traditional networks. So we established this network. Context for the presentation then is that the technical and logistical challenges of moving these feeds around the world are reality. And while IP is proven to be cost effective and flexible, the familiar workflows of satellite and fiber are actually still the preferred modes today. However, content owners are under pressure to deliver more live content than ever before, whether that's multiple feeds from a single event or actually multiple events that are happening at the same time. So concurrency around matches or events or games that are happening and making that content available. And alongside that, trying to keep the costs for that distribution comparatively low. We feel that there's scope for hybrid workflows to come to the fore, leveraging both the benefits of both delivery methods, satellite for primary world feeds, also IP for all of the additional feeds. What do we mean by IP? And IP is everything in video these days, but on the left-hand side, we've got uncompressed IP. SMPTE 2022-6 and more recently SMPTE 2110 is not what we're looking at here. Those are uncompressed formats. And equally on the far right, you've got a few OTT formats. Where we work as a company, where we operate, is in the compressed domain. Typically, transport stream over IP. And normally, although there are other protocols available, the ones that we deal with regularly are REST, SRT, and ZXI. Crucially put in there in alphabetical order so that I don't upset anybody. Normally what we're carrying is mezzanine format, so up to 422 10-bit. More often than not is 420 8-bit, but is high bandwidth, multiple channel audio for mezzanine purposes delivered to head ends. So a typical satellite workflow then. So a lot of our customers still use satellite for delivery of the world feed out to head ends. A very simplified view, but it contains everything that I want to talk about. So it is a established primary contribution path. People have been moving world feeds around satellite for decades using this method, and everyone's quite happy with it. Equally, we've proven over the years it's happy doing SD or HD or even UHD. It's a one-to-many distribution model. But actually, I have a question mark at the end of that, because is it really? It is in a technical sense, but in an operational workflow sense, it's not a one-to-many. It's actually many one-to-ones. No one organization is responsible for delivering to potentially 100 destinations in a footprint. The source content owner is responsible for delivering it to the satellite, and then all of the receivers equally individually responsible for pulling it down. The source isn't involved in pointing antennas or configuring IRDs. They just need to deliver it to the satellite, make sure it's there, and hand out a stream entitlement to all of the takers. And it allows complex, large distribution paths to actually be made very simple, because you're delineating the responsibility for that. We've also got primary versus secondary contribution. We get involved with some of our customers where they're using satellite to deliver a clean feed from event location to a production center, and it's only going to that one place, and they're spending tens of thousands per day on sat trucks and bandwidth on these long event days just to deliver one single feed to somewhere else, and then it's being put onto IP networks anyway. So why not just use IP in some of these scenarios? Like I mentioned earlier, the receivers are technically decoupled from the source. So we do have the satellite antenna and the satellite transponder itself in the middle as that point of delineation. And so people can pick it up from a very well-known established place. Regardless of where the uplink's coming from, the feed's always available on the satellite. So low operational complexity, but actually a high resource cost. And IP is a flip side. This is just an example of the kind of scale of some of the distributions that we do. But actually having that world feed and delivering it to multiple takers, what we do is we shift that point of responsibility right to the source. And so you've got a world feed, and what I've shown here is just 2 affiliates taking it as ZXA, 2 as SRT, 2 as REST, and 1 wants an RTMP feed. But all of the complexity of the configuration of all of those endpoints actually sits at this source point here. And that's fine for 24/7 deliveries, because you've got the time to set it up and make it. But when you get into the levels of occasional use, what you often have is at best an hour's lineup time to arrange all of this configuration, make sure IP addresses are right, make sure the security firewalls are okay. And it actually puts a hell of a lot of pressure onto that one person in the organization. So what we have here is normally the receivers are technically coupled to the source because of the bidirectional nature of the transmission of IP. But actually what you have is a really low resource cost. You can put receivers out there that are capable of gigabits per second of receiving of feeds that will sit in a 1RU server quite happily. Then we have this thing that perhaps we made up. We coined a term of a downstream cost profile to highlight what it costs content takers to acquire feeds in a format that is helpful to them and their ongoing content delivery. So very often we get involved in feeds, and obviously from my accent and from the UK. And so everything that we do there in major sports, they tend to make the feed available at BT Tower, or they make the feed available on a European satellite for downlink. And then largely the content owner kind of washes their hands of the transmission path at that point and just says, well, we're making it publicly available. It's up to you to take it. But very often over the last few years, we've got involved with customers who have said that the technical costs of acquisition are now more expensive than the commercial rights that they're paying for it in the first place because of this thing that we call the downstream cost profile. Yes, it's available on satellite and they're not paying for the satellite transponder space, but they've still got to find antennas. And if they don't have those themselves, which a lot of modern distribution platforms don't, because they're all IP based, and so they're paying third-party services for this, and they're hundreds of dollars an hour for downlink, re-encoding, fiber transmission, turn it into something that they can actually use and deliver it into a cloud space. And a couple of $100 an hour is palatable when you've got things like football or soccer, where it's a very definitive programming block. It's kind of a 2.5, 3 hour programming block. The commercial rights of that sport are actually well understood. We know we can extract the value of that, and we're quite happy to pay for it. But actually in longer form sports, we quite often get involved in things like horse racing. And so it's an 8-hour day, or a horse racing festival, which is 4 8-hour days in a row. And those downstream cost profiles really start to mount up against the commercial rights of the sport itself. I tried to highlight it a little bit in a diagram as a comparison. So again, in the UK, what we have are these traditional satellite and fiber workflows where there are costs associated with each part of it. So the encoding, uplinks, transponder space at the other side, if you don't have the facilities to do it yourself, you're downlinking, decoding and passing it on to an affiliate, or actually utilizing a fiber circuit or multiple fiber circuits. But very often at the very end, they're turning it into an IP format and delivering it to a final destination, that last mile. Whereas IP workflows, or workflows if you don't type it out correctly, the complexity and all the costs are born right at this point here. Is just actually we need to make the feed available. The bandwidth down here at this level is definitely at commodity rates. You know, it's not even worth calculating what it's costing the receiver to have it. So the satellite limitations against the context of the presentation then are, for the last 60 years, I think it's 60 years and 2 months since the first satellite transmission for video, it's done everything it's been asked to do within the domain it's been asked to do it. However, consumer demand is pushing broadcasters to make more live content available to satisfy the viewers, and satellite has some limitations to deliver this content, namely concurrency, because you just can't afford the transponder space to deliver 10, 12 feeds that might be coming from a venue, especially when you don't understand the commercial value of it. Geographic footprint itself. So we've got a customer who delivers a lot of UK-based Premiership football, so the Scottish Premier Football League, and they have European satellite coverage because they've got enough takers to do a world feed there. They've got APAC satellite coverage because they've got enough takers to do the satellite feed there, but they've only got one taker in the US. And so it's cost prohibitive to take more satellite transponder space just for that one taker. So those feeds are handled differently. And then format itself. So IP distribution in a hybrid world. So this is what we implemented for our customer. Is in addition to the world feed that they put out, they're also responsible for making the other 5 matches available to all of the domestic broadcasters. And so what I have here is an example of the incoming feed and all of the variants that we make from it. And so we have a source encoder coming in, delivering a mezzanine format feed. So this is 30 megabits per second, multiple channels of audio, and actually trying to mirror the same color scheme. That mezzanine feed is being wrapped as ZXI and delivered to BBC. It's being wrapped as ZXI and being delivered to Stream Digital, who are responsible for all of the club's TV channels. It's also then being wrapped as SRT and being delivered to Sky Sports for broadcasting in the UK. They then transcode it, and they make a lower bitrate version wrapped as SRT and delivered to Stats Perform. They have a different version, which is then de-interlaced and turned into AAC audio for delivery to Caster, which they use for editing and streaming, and then a standards conversion method. So what we've spent some time working with our partners at ATAM to make a motion compensated frame rate conversion that is capable of being deployed in the cloud for those standards conversions for high profile sport. The crucial point of it, which I'll get to, is that when this football matches aren't on, none of this equipment exists. This is all virtual resource that is just then packed away at the end of the event. So we can see where all those distributions are going. So this is what it looks like for one of the feeds. They actually deliver 6 concurrent. And so actually to do this on satellite, you're talking about taking 6 transponders worth of space. So they do it for the world feed, they do it for the main one that is going out, but there are the other 5 matches, this is how they need to do the distributions. In green, so the entire environment itself can be stopped when not required. When it's stopped, it retains all IP addresses. We liken an IP address in IP space, if you're comparing it against satellite, is actually the satellite transponder frequency modulation scheme. It's where we know we're going to find that content. It's always there. It retains all source config. So the configuration around the source and how that source encoder connects into the environment, all of the destination config. So each of these destinations with their specific lines of configuration, taking it as a ZXI feed, taking it as an SRT feed, the IP addresses we're targeting, the port numbers is all retained. The transcoders and standards conversion profiles equally are all retained, so everything is easily then just recreated when they need it. And then all future schedules. So sitting there and saying, well, this is what's happening this weekend. We know the same thing's going to be happening next weekend. We just create that schedule in advance and then shut it down when it's not required. So we believe the opportunity exists for a hybrid satellite and IP workflow offered to the customer to allow them to be delivering tier 1 content to broadcasters and for alternative feeds or additional content to be made available via IP. And being made available, what we really mean is putting it into a format where it mirrors a satellite workflow. The satellite workflow being the content is being made available by someone and being put somewhere public, and then each individual responsible rights taker can then connect their equipment in as a receiver and pull that feed down, but they don't have to be establishing relationships with the source owner. However, the end customer needs consistency around the presentation of that content. For satellite, that normally means the content is made available on the same satellite transponder each time. And for IP, that means the content is available at that given IP address with protocol options and a repeatable workflow, as last-minute network changes can render the workflow unusable due to firewalls, etc. So it's important to have that consistency around it. What we feel happens at the moment is that every time they need to do a new event, the whole workflow is reinvented right from the start. It might come from a different IP address, and you're scrabbling around to do those last-minute changes. So what we have as a full workflow for our customer is they deliver the world feed over satellite to all of the takers. It actually goes via, obviously, 2 different satellites. But they're also then delivering that world feed through an IP platform, delivering that to the takers who want an IP backup, but then all of the additional content, and the example that I showed you was actually the 5 other matches are all being delivered through an IP platform. Crucially, at the end of the match, they have no responsibility over the uplink or the satellite transponder. As far as they're concerned, it doesn't exist. And then the same with the IP platform, is that they just shut it down. It goes into a stop state, and it equally then doesn't exist. So we get this entire infrastructure just doesn't exist outside of usage, which when we're trying to hit green credentials and sustainability targets as well, means that we can leverage better metrics doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Do we have any questions?
Is there a reason why we keep doing transport stream over IP? Can we just modulate it? Can it just stay IP from the beginning?
In the world that we live in, yes, it does need to be transport stream. Normally because what we're bringing in are these mezzanine broadcast feeds which have the structure around them so that they have the multiple channels of audio, because where they're being delivered to actually needs to unpack it in that familiar format. So yeah, at least in our world, for now, yes.
And don't forget those all-important ad triggers so people can pay for their content. Yeah. Chris, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay.